Our learning is Leila Nishmas Mendel Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven and Hashem Hashem and Aliyah. Okay, so we're the last word on Pei Gimel Amud Beis 83b. The last word. Amar Rava. Rava says we're going to go back to the opinion of Hanania, who said there was this discussion about ships that could be carried that are moved both when they are full and when they are empty. Okay, so according to Hanania, who said that a ship that as long as it's moved while both empty, which is easier to move it, but even when it's carried, even when it's filled up, then it's susceptible to tumah. Right. So that was the opinion of Hanania. Hanania said that the criteria for a ship to be tameh is specifically when it's something which is carried while it is full, which is not so typical for a ship because ships are big. But now we add, according to Hanania, this idea of moving a ship that is full being susceptible to tumah is tiltul aydei shvarim shmei tiltul, even if it's carried by oxen. In other words, we don't mean, yesterday we spoke about being carried while it's full. We didn't elaborate. Did it mean that people are carrying it, or if it could be carried by oxen? Oxen carrying it is obviously much more difficult. Perhaps it would be like the equivalent of, a car dragging a boat. Sometimes you'll see a boat like that's being dragged by a car. That's still considered moved while it's full. Whereas if the ship is so big that even it's not going to be moved by oxen at all, that you'll only fill it up while it's already in the sea, then it'll be tahar. Again, so there was discussion yesterday about ships being tahar, and about ships being tahar, and Hanani said the criteria is that as long as it's moved, not only while it's empty, but while it's full, meaning off that's out of the sea. And now we're adding that when we say it's being moved while it's full, it could even be dragged by oxen. Okay, now we're going to prove that from the following. Okay, so it's not. We learned in a Mishnah, Shalosh Agalos Hein. There are 3 different types of wagons. Okay, different types of wagons, and we're going to talk about these wagons in the context of Tuma and Tara. So Asuya ke Katedra Tamea Midras. If a wagon is made like a chair and people are sitting on it, then it's going to have tumas medras. Tumas medras is a tuma that is a sitting type of tuma that is generated by someone sitting on it. So if it's made to be sat upon, then it's susceptible to sitting tuma, i.e. tumas medras. Kemita tamea mace. If it's made like a bed, if it's made like in the shape of a bed, i.e. like flat, then it's something which does not have tumas medras, only regular corpse tuma. Okay, so not that people would actually sleep on it, but sometimes a wagon was made like into this shape, just like straight, and things would be put on top of it. That is something which was not sat upon, and therefore does not have tumas medras. Shalavanim tahora miklum. And this is the key line. That's what we really want to focus on. If it's a wagon which is used to transport stones, then it is not going to be tameh at all. Now, what is a wagon that is used to transport stones? A wagon that's used to transport stones was typically going to be a bunch of ropes that are tied together. We're talking about big stones. So you talk about like a quarry that's going to be moving, big stones. So you have these ropes that are tied at like a netting, like very, very wide, and they carry these huge stones. Okay, that's the wagon that is used to carry stones. And we're told that it's completely tahar. Rav Yochanan though qualifies this, and yet it says, Vim yesh ba beis kibel rimonim tamei mace. If this wagon, the one that carries stones, is able to carry pomegranates, which is obviously much smaller, then it is susceptible to corpse tuma. Okay, so let's just focus on the last line. The last line is telling us that you have this type of wagon that is used to carry stones. If the stones that it carries, if the way that it's constructed is that the gaps between the ropes are so large that pomegranates will fall through it, if you put pomegranates in it, they're all just going to fall out because the netting is too large, then it's not going to become tameh at all. Okay, but if the netting is much smaller, right, that you're going to have holes, like very small holes to carry the stones, with like very small netting, very tight netting, and it's able to carry pomegranates, then it will be mikabel tuma. Okay, now that is Mishnah 1. The next Mishnah that we still haven't, now again, what are we trying to prove? We're trying to prove that carrying something by oxen is considered carrying. We still haven't demonstrated that, but we're now going to prove it from the next Mishnah, or the rest of that Mishnah, which continues and talks about something else. So what is that next Mishnah? This Mishnah says, Shalosh Tevos Hein. There are 3 types of chests in regards to Tumah. Okay? Teva shepischa mitzida tmea medras. If it's a chest whose opening is on the side, okay, then it's going to be tameh. Now, tameh medras. Now, again, tameh medras is something where tumah that is generated by someone lying on it. Now, the only time something's going to be tameh medras is if it's something which is normal for people to lie on it. Okay, so again, Well, hopefully we're going to walk away as Tumah experts over here. Okay, it'll happen. Okay, so Tumah's Medrus is Tumah that is generated when, let's say, a Zav, which is one of the people who generate Tumah, lie down on the item. Okay, now the only way you're going to be, now you can lie down on anything. I can lie down on this table, I can lie down on the floor, I can lie down on the beam over there, I can lie down on a stender, but it's only going to be, you're only going to have Tumah's Medrus if it's something which is normal to be lied upon. Okay, that's the rule. So now this type of chest, whose opening is on the side, is contaminated with Tumah's Medrus. Why? Because these types of chests we're referring to, typically it's like a chest on the bottom and people lie down on the top. Okay, and therefore it makes sense. You have Tumah's Medrus. However, milmala, if the opening of the chest is at the top, obviously it's not meant for people to lie upon because there has a receptacle at the top. So Tamei Mace. Okay, then it's only going to be susceptible to corpse Tumah, but not Tumah's Medrus because it's not normal for people to lie down upon. Okay? V'abba b'mida tohar miklum. But a chest that is tremendous, very large, is not going to be tamei at all. Okay? Okay, but if it's very large, then and it's not able to be moved, then it's not going to be tamei at all. Okay? Now over here in that Mishnah, it does not. Okay, so or this Mishnah, the last line of the Mishnah is basically telling us that when something is very large, it's not tamei at all. Now the Mishnah before, which is connected to this Mishnah over here, doesn't mention this very large thing and doesn't make that qualification. It doesn't say, oh, it's so large that it's not going to be tamei. So the implication, it's a bit of interesting inference. Okay, let's just summarize a review, and then we'll see the inference. We have two Mishnahs side by side. They're talking about the parameters of Tumah regarding different things. One is about wagons, one is about chests. Chest meaning like a dresser type of thing, okay? By the dresser it says if it's so large, then it's not going to become tamei, okay? By the wagon it doesn't say that, okay? Now, why doesn't it say that? Right? Because by definition, what is a wagon? A wagon is something that is dragged, right? Or else it wouldn't be called a wagon, it would be called something stationary, right? So clearly we see the fact that we don't have that qualification by the wagon, and we say by the wagon the only qualification is the netting too large or too small, but it doesn't qualify and doesn't limit it in any way because of its size. Why? Because a wagon by definition is dragged, and so you see something moved by an ox is considered moved, and therefore it's not considered too large, and therefore we want to infer from here that Hananya, who is talking about a ship that is moved while it is full, as long as it's moved by oxen, as long as it has some way of being moved, meaning lav dafka, not necessarily oxen, but the point is, as long as it has some way of being moved, that's still considered being moved, and therefore it's going to be susceptible to tumah. You hear the inference, right? It's a little bit of an interesting inference. The point is that the fact that it doesn't in any way qualify the items which are moved and say, oh, it's too big to be moved by people. It's only moved by an ox. No, something which has stones on it. Obviously, people are not going to be schlepping things which have huge rocks in it. Nonetheless, as long as it's moved, it's considered moving. Therefore, we want to apply that same principle to the ship and say that as long as the ship is able to be moved, doesn't matter how it's moved, it's still going to be considered moved, even if it's moved by oxen. And therefore, we want to infer from here that a ship that is moved while full, even though it's being moved by oxen, is still considered being moved. And that's the Gemara's conclusion, how we a possible proof or a proof to to our interpretation of Hananya that when we said that a ship that could be moved, whether it's empty or full, it could even be moved by oxen. Okay, now the Gemara is going to shift and move on to a different discussion, still about ships and tumah, but move away from we're starting a new idea. Tana Rabbanan. Okay, Tana Rabbanan a little bit further. Tana Rabbanan midras klicheres tahar. The medras, in other words, walking upon an earthenware vessel, will not make something tamei. Okay, so if a zav walks on an earthenware vessel, will not make something tamei. Rav Yossi Omer af hasvina. Rav Yossi says also a ship. Now this Bryce over here is a little bit cryptic. We don't know what he means. Okay, Mike Amar, what does Rav Yossi mean? Meaning we know ships are not tamei in general. In general, ships do not have tumas medras. Most ships are not tamei at all. So this Brysa needs a little bit of unpacking, because it needs, and what we're ultimately going to do is suggest two different ways of rereading this brisa, because it can't read on its own. So Amrav Zvid Hachikamar. This is what the brisa means. Medras klicheres tahar. While a person walks on an earthenware vessel by a zav, it will not become tamei. Okay, a person walks on an earthenware vessel by a zav will not become tamei. Umagai tamei. But an earthenware vessel that a person touches, a zav touches, will make it tamei. Okay, so a zav will not make a kli, a utensil, an earthenware vessel, tame simply by walking on it, but touching an earthenware vessel will become tame. Usfina shalcheres tamea, and an earthenware ship is also going to be susceptible to tuma. Says the Gemara. We'll pause for a second. Okay, kechananya. That brisa that says an earthenware ship becomes tame, that goes like the view of Chananya that we saw yesterday. Okay, and then the brisa. Now we go back to the brisa. The brisa continues. Rav Yosi Omer af hasfina tahora. Rav Yosi comes along and says, no, even an earthenware ship is going to be tahar. And that goes, says the Gemara, Ketana Didan, like the Tana of our Mishnah, who did not distinguish between earthenware ships and non-earthenware ships. Again, if you recall, yesterday we had a machlokas about ships. Our Mishnah that we started this whole discussion with said that all ships are tahar, and Chananya came along and said earthenware ships are actually able to become tameh. So the way we're reading this, the Bryce, according to Rav Zvid, is saying that an earthenware vessel is going to be tameh tumas meis, and also an earthenware ship is able to become tameh, okay, by contact, and that is like the view of Chananya. And then Rav Yossi, who says af hasvina, we're interpreting the words even the ship, meaning even a ship is tahar. That goes like our Tana, like Tana of Mishnah, who says that all ships are tahar. Asks Rav Papa, Maskala Rav Papa, my af. What this read doesn't fit very nicely because the text that we have in front of us says Rav Yossi says even a ship. Now the way we're reading this brisa is to tell us that the way we're reading the brisa is saying that the Tanakama is saying that it's tameh, and Rav Yossi is saying it's tahar. You wouldn't say even, you would say not. Right? In other words, the way we're reading the brisa right now is saying the Tanakama is saying that earthenware ships are tameh. And then Rav Yossi is coming along and saying that earthenware ships are not tameh. So you wouldn't say even earthenware ships. The way to say it is not earthenware ships. So even though we recognize that this brisa can't be read on its own, and we have to incorporate new terminology into it, new words, but there's still something wrong with your read according to Rav Zvid. So Ela Rav Papa is a new read. Hachi Ka'amar Midras Klicheres Tahar. That the trampling, that the person walking on an earthenware vessel by a zav will not make it tameh. Okay, it's tahar. Umagai tameh. But touching it is going to make an earthenware utensil tameh. Vishal eitz. And if you have a vessel made of wood, be midraso, uve magal tameh. If you have something made of wood, whether you step on it or whether you touch it, it's tameh. Usfina sayardain tahora. And a small ship, a boat that goes in the Jordan, it's going to be tahar. Who does that go like? So if you remember, that goes like Ketana Didan. The Tana of our Mishnah said that a small boat is going to be tahar. Big boat or small boat, you're going to be tahar. Rav Yossi Omer, Afasvina Tameya. Rav Yossi comes along and says, even a small ship is tameh, kechananya, and that goes like chananya. Now the word af also now makes sense because the way Rav Papa is reading the brisa is that the brisa is talking about things which are tameh, and then it limits it and says, oh, but not a small ship. And then Rav Yossi comes along and says, no, even a small ship. So now the word even, af, now actually fits, and basically the way we're reading that brisa is to say that the Tanakama is going like our Mishnah, which said big ship or small ship, tahar, and then Rav Yossi, who says a small ship is going to be tameh, that goes like chananya. Okay, now, period. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to something we just quoted above and wants to understand it. Umedrus klicheres minalan de tahar. How do we know that walking on an earthenware vessel will not make it tameh? In other words, right? So that would seem to be something that everyone agreed upon. The brisa began by saying that medrus, walking on something or lying on something by a zav on an earthenware vessel will not make it tameh. Where do we see that from? Amar Chizkiah Damakra v'ish asher yigab mimishkavo. Okay, a man who will touch his couch, that person is tameh. So makish mishkavo lo. The fact that the brisa, the pasuk, goes ahead and says it's his couch. It doesn't say a person who touches a couch. It says a person touches his couch. So it implies that there's some connection between the couch and the person. What is the purpose of making a connection between the couch and the person? Mahu islay tara b'mikvah. Just as the individual is able to become pure in a mikvah, af mishkavo nami islay tahara b'mikvah. So too a person's couch has to be something which is able to be purified in a mikvah. And since earthenware vessels we know cannot be purified in a mikvah, we see from here, says Chizkiah, that an earthenware utensil, since it can't be purified in a mikvah, it's not susceptible to the tumah that's being discussed in that pasuk, i.e. tumas medrus. Okay, so again, the premise of the what we're trying to learn over here, medrus again, tumas medrus means when a zav lies down on something, it becomes tameh. Now that means even if they don't come into contact, the zav touches something, the zav touches this table, it's going to become tameh. And that touching the zav is always going to be due. But there's something called tumas medrus, which means lying upon something, and there, what we're saying over here is that tumas matters of an earthenware vessel, even if a zav lies upon it. So let's say you have a mattress on it. Let's say there's earthenware and there is a mattress on it, so the zav is not going to touch it directly, and then the zav lies on top of it. This earthenware table over here, kli, is not going to become tameh. Why? Because there is a comparison in the pasuk between the person and the utensil. And just like a person is able to become purified in a mikvah, so too the utensil has to be able to become purified in a mikvah. And we know earthenware vessels cannot become purified in a mikvah. Okay, now we're going to bring a different source. The Rav Shmuel Tana. We learn from the Academy of Rav Shmuel. Kimishkav nidasa yela. Just the couch of nida will be to her. So makish mishkavala, and that pasuk also it compares her to the things she's lying upon. So mahi is latar b'mikvah, just like she, the nida, has the ability to purify in a mikvah. Af mishkava nami is latar b'mikvah. So too, when we talk about a couch, something that is going to be tumas medris, it has to have the ability to purify in a mikvah. La puke klicheres delays latar b'mikvah, to exclude an earthenware vessel which you are not able to purify in a mikvah, because earthenware vessels are not able to become purified in a mikvah. Okay, so just parenthetically, once we're talking about earthenware vessels, right? This, and although we're talking about tumantara, the same principle of earthenware in a mikvah when it comes to tuma also applies to kashering or tfilas kalim, not kashering, but tfilas kalim, right? The question is always a question about, do you need to just practical halacha? We'll finish with something practical over here, and that is that again, it's not identical, but the notion of earthenware is not something which is going to go into a mikvah, right? So there's a major question about, do you have to be tovel, right? If you buy metal or glass or whatever it is, you have to be tovel it. You have to tovel it before using it, right? But what about earthenware? So what's the halacha by earthenware? The answer is no, right? By earthenware is not so much goes to mikvah. The question, which is a very big discussion, is what about most of the earthenware that we have has a glaze on it? And the question is, once it has a glaze, does that make it something which you're chayiv to bring into a mikvah? So, for example, china is a perfect example of this, right? So china it's earthenware, that's what it is, but it also has a thick glaze, and therefore the question is, does it need to have a mikvah? Many poskim say absolutely not, because at the end of the day, it's earthenware. The glaze is not the ikr. The glaze is just there to hold it together and make sure it doesn't get scratched, etc., and therefore it doesn't need to go to mikvah. So, you go to Amazing Glaze. The sisterhood's going to have an event with Amazing Glaze soon, as we just learned in a few weeks. So, do you make this thing with Amazing Glaze? Do you have to bring it to the mikvah? Many poskim will say you do not. There are poskim who say you should be strict and bring it to mikvah, but then you would be tovel without a bracha due to the fact that at the end of the day, it's ikr. The main part of it is earthenware. The glaze on the outside is not earthenware, but at the end of the day, it's not considered substantial enough, and therefore there are two totally legitimate views. I think it would be fair to say the majority view says you do not need. I believe the Star K locally says you do not have to be tovel china and and glazed cups, etc. But there are those who suggest a person should be tovel it, but you should tovel it without a bracha for that reason.
Did it ever belong to a goy?
Oh, by Amazing Glaze, you're saying you're saying they make it from scratch, right? Is that what they do? They're making it from scratch?
You make it there.
Yeah, even if they did make it from scratch. Yeah.
Make it. So
yeah.
Maybe you say that.
Yeah, you're right. If you're making it, even if you do one step in the process, you're right. That's a very fair point. So you're right. It's not even a good question by Amazing Glaze. I don't know what I was thinking. If you're making it, then that already takes, they're finishing
it.
Who's finishing it?
The goy is finishing
So, they're finishing it. So I'm not sure. There is, if you do one substantial part of the process that does make a difference, where you see this, there's the pizza ovens, what do they call it? The red, what do they call them? The red pizza ovens that they have. No, they're probably the Betty Crockers, whatever. They're very popular. Everyone's getting them. And there is, who is it, Chafkei or OK, I think, basically figured out some way of having Jews involved in one step of the process. And you'll see a little sign there, does not need tefillah. And I never looked into it properly, but basically what they do, it's not because of the fact that it's plugged in, which is one of the heterim we spoke about in the past. It's something which needs to be used with plugging in. There is a heter. I would typically not rely on it with something like that because it could be tyfled, but they have Jews involved in making one of the steps, and therefore, to your point, it precludes the necessity of tefillah. So I'm not sure which step they have them involved, but that's why they say if you really read closely, it doesn't need tefillah, and they say ask your rabbi because it's not agreed upon by all, but basically the reason they permit they say you don't need tefillah, at least according to the OK, is because Jews are making it, to your point. But again, they're not making the whole thing. There's no way you have a bunch of rabbis sitting there manufacturing the Betty Crocker, but they're involved in some level of the processing, and therefore that precludes it from needing tefillah for that reason. Yeah, good points. Okay, have a great day.